Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, host Casey Hentges takes the heat off of the solarization plots in our bermudagrass eradication study. Mike Miller from Pond Pro Shop in Shawnee, Oklahoma, has tips for dealing with the string algae in our garden ponds. Lynda Carrier, the new garden manager at the Botanic Garden at Oklahoma State University, takes us on a tour of her home garden. In the vegetable garden, we take the stoop out of cucumber picking, and Barbara Brown cooks up some of the last summer squash.
We're back out here at the Cimarron Research Station, and it's early September, and so we are pulling the plastic off of our solarization plots that are here. Now, just as a reminder of what we were doing, this particular plot just had plastic covering live green Bermuda grass. We hadn't done anything to it, and we simply covered it with plastic. Now, we started this process in mid-July, so it's been covered with the plastic for about a month and a half. And you can see we've got a pretty good kill on the vegetation. We don't know what's necessarily going on around in the soil just yet. Over here, we had a plot where we sprayed it with glyphosate first, and then we solarized it. So you can see they look very similar. And then as we come forward here, you can see that we did a sod removal, and then we solarized it. And surprisingly, we do have some growth back in this plot. Now, what we're going to do over the next month as we go into fall, we're going to kind of keep a look at these plots to see how much regrowth we have and how quickly it does regrow, so that we can kind of see which one gave us the best bang for our buck in that month and a half time period of solarizing. Again, when we talk about eradicating Bermuda grass, it's so difficult to really do that, and that's really not our intention here. It's just to find a way to suppress it in order to establish a garden.
Now it's time to talk about the other bugaboo that you find in your pond during the spring and summer, during the heat of the summer especially. You're going to find string algae growing in your pond. It's filamentous algae. It just means that the algae is linked together and made a filament that looks like a string or a hair that's growing off the rock. This pond doesn't have any of that left on it. She says it has had during earlier times, but she's treated for it and taken care of it. It also shows that the pond remains in balance. She's got the right number of fish with the right amount of water with the right amount of bacteria. So those are the things that you've got to think about. Balance in your pond. String algae, if it's growing on your rocks, is really healthy for your pond. It's a biofilm, and that's where that bacteria colony lives. We can get into a lot of science about the bacteria and what's going on and why you shouldn't remove it. But just let me say that we think to go in and clean your pond once a year and power wash it is the wrong thing to do. You wind up wiping out a huge bacteria colony that you've spent a long time building up. And that bacteria colony is what's going to keep that algae that grows on the rocks from growing strings and turning into that hair-like or string algae that you hate so much. There are products, oxygenators, that you can put on your pond that are granule. You pour them on the algae and then wash it off, and that'll kill the algae and remove most of it from the rock. But you have to understand that you're living the pond life. You are going to have some algae in your pond. That's probably the good news. Everybody has algae. The bad news is that you can't get rid of the algae. The good news is that you can manage the algae by doing a few things. For string algae, what you want to do if it gets real bad is get in there and get some of it out. A lot of folks will take a brand new toilet brush. I emphasize it's a brand new toilet brush, tie it on the end of a stick, and then use that and twirl it around to get that long hair algae out of the water. I don't find that very efficient. We usually just use our hands and get down on our knees and pull it out so we can take out big bunches of it if it grows. But if you start soon enough, you're not ever going to let it get to that point. So check your balance, look at your filters all the time and make sure they're clean. Make sure that you're trapping as much of the nutrient as you can. If you have a pond vac or a shop vac and can clean the bottom of your pond, that's going to go a long ways in keeping that string algae from growing in the water. You're not going to have as much problem with it if you can keep the nutrient at bay. Too many fish, too much nutrient, sunlight, and water is a recipe to grow algae, both single cell and string. The string is the one that comes with the heat of the summer, and that's what most people dislike, is the string algae growing in there. They think it makes it look ugly. I think it makes it look natural. That's a personal opinion. Everybody's got one. They're like noses. Some of them are more pointed than others. So enjoy your pond, enjoy the time with it, and do some simple things like water changes, cleaning your filter, cleaning the muck out of the bottom, before you get to the point where you have to start treating it with costly chemicals. Once you start that process, you're probably going to have to keep it up because you're killing the algae. It's going to disintegrate. It's going to sink to the bottom, create more of that muck. That muck creates nutrient. That nutrient in the water causes an imbalance. That imbalance is what you're fighting against. So that's what we're all about, is trying to figure out how to balance your pond correctly so that it doesn't cost you a lot of time or a lot of money.
Today we're at the home of Lynda Carrier, who may look familiar to many of you as she's been on the show quite a lot. She is one of our departmental research specialists, but today we're talking to her in a different capacity. We are at her home garden, and it's always nice to see that someone has a hobby that follows their career as well. And today she's going to show us around her home garden and how they've repurposed a lot of things to make a beautiful garden.
I'm Lynda Carrier. This is my home garden near Stillwater, Oklahoma, and it's fall time season, so I've started some fall vegetable crops. And as you can see, I still have quite a few things from summer that are still in the garden. I've got tomatoes and several peppers. The asparagus is ferned out right now, but I have taken out quite a few things, and that's where it's given me a little bit of space to do some of this fall gardening. I also had several rows of sweet corn in there this spring, and then I decided to plant some more sweet corn again, so it's now in the process of tasseling and silking, and we should have corn in another probably 3 weeks or a month. But anyways, on the fall gardening, I've got some straw down here for mulch, and it's going to sprout too, because I've got wheat coming up, but that's okay because that's a good cover crop. But one of the things I like to do is everything I've got out here is on drip tape, and it just simplifies my life so I don't have to water every night. And so anyways, I've got drip tape, and I've got some cabbage and some broccoli here, and I've planted some other seedlings of some other things here. I actually have a row of green beans that are trying to come up here because I thought maybe I'd try to do some fall green beans. But on our garden area here, we've got to try to keep the Bermuda grass out, which it's very hard to plant a garden on the flat without Bermuda grass coming in. So we've got railroad ties buried down, and then we've got this border around it to hopefully keep out as much Bermuda as possible. But it's always a constant problem trying to keep it out. One of the things we like to do is like if I have a lot of bad produce and stuff, rather than it going to waste, it goes to the chickens. So I've got about a dozen chickens in a coop back here. And usually I just give them the bad tomatoes and the bad cucumbers, and anything that's bad they get. So, and they seem to like it, so they're happy with that. This is our water garden feature, and I guess about 4 years ago we had this idea that we wanted to have a big water garden feature, or actually my husband did, Rusty. We had a small one out in the front of the house and we wanted to put a porch on, so our idea was to have this bigger water garden, and it was really his idea. So, but anyways, we'd had a little fire pit here to begin with, and then we decided that we needed a little bit more out here. So we came up, I guess I kind of looked up some different ideas as far as what we wanted to do, and I wanted to have a layer. I wanted it to have a layer effect. The ground here is really flat, so I wanted to give it some dimension, and so my husband, he's in the ditching and excavating business, and so he had a leftover manhole and we used that for our top tier and put our liner in, and then various big rocks that he gets from various different jobs when they dig up stuff. And so we had a lot of rocks to work with, and he dug it out, and we started building, shaping it up and using the rocks and forming it all, and put our liners in, obviously before the rocks, and then just kind of went off of that. And then I guess the landscaping we just kind of added as we got finished with the pond part of it. So that's kind of how we're doing it. We've got fish, we've got koi. We also have our little fire pit area, and then we put up some cedar poles and lighting and stuff, so in the evenings, on cool fall evenings, we can sit around the fire pit and do some s'mores and have some fun stuff like that. But we did the stones. These were some stones my husband got from various jobs that we refurbished or recycled. We also have this shady area in right by our house, and I like to have a lot of rocks and various things around here. I grew up on a farm, and we live on a farm now, so I really like to use old wagon wheels and old farm equipment around in the landscape just to kind of accentuate what we have. We like to use rocks and various other things in our yard. We've got several bricks that I've used to make the sidewalks with. These are all things that we've kind of recycled over the years. And then we just add some other elements into it. We've got a little bridge because this is kind of a low area in the yard where water runs through. And so my husband has put together several things over the years that we just use to accentuate all of our rocks and our patios and everything. This is a greenhouse that my husband and I just started working on, actually in the spring, and it's taken us quite a while to get it all together. We started out, before we ever even decided the size of it or anything, we had a bunch of old windows that mostly were given to us, and we took all those old windows and figured out how to lay it out, and that kind of dictated our size of the greenhouse based on that. And we wrote a lot of things down trying to figure out our 2x4s and the distance and everything, and eventually came up with how big our footings needed to be, and then we did the stem wall and then just built up from there. We are still in the process of getting it finished, so I don't really have much for plants in here just yet, but we've got electricity in it. Most of the windows open, so hopefully we'll have good ventilation. And then I've got a fan set up on a temperature, so it kicks on when the temperature rises. And it's also reversible, so it can force the air through the shutter if I want to have it flipped that way to pull the air through. So we'll just play with that a little bit just to try to figure out what works best. But mainly the greenhouse I want to use for about 3 seasons, fall, winter, and spring, and then the summer I'll probably not have much of anything in it. But I like to start vegetable crops and stuff in the fall as well as in the early spring. And eventually I'd like to do some hydroponics in there. When we started with the greenhouse, this was existing, actually all this area was already our garden. So we were trying to figure out the location to put the greenhouse, and this made the most sense. At one time we thought about adding it on to our shop, and we decided that was not a good idea. So we decided for this whole separate structure, and the best place was in the garden. So we actually transitioned the garden to the east and extended it out this way. That way I still had just as much space in the garden, and so we ended up with basically the same amount of space in the garden without having to take away once we put this greenhouse in. One other thing in the greenhouse, my husband made a nice bench for me in there for potting and working with, and so he's done a very nice job of making a lot of things over the years. Thank you for coming out to our house, and we appreciate you looking at our gardens and everything we've done and all the things we've used with recycling our projects with.
So today we want to take a look at some trellised cucumbers. We have a variety trial going here, but we also have done some trellising to make it easier to harvest them. As you can see the cucumbers right here. They're easy to see, they're easy to find. Traditionally, cucumbers are grown along the ground. Harvesting them, requires bending over and basically touching the ground to be able to harvest them, and they're hard to find in those vines. And so I think that is one of the greatest benefits of growing them up on the trellis. There's several systems I've been involved with, from netting to strings, but these panels, these are just cattle panels that you can buy at any hardware store. They seem to work really well, and these are not even full ones. These are just pieces that were left over from previous things, and so they're easy to put up. They're quick. It doesn't take a lot of effort to put them up. And even the training the vines, a couple times a week, I just would walk by and just kind of start them up. And once I got them started, they really took care of themselves. That you can see how they kind of wrap through all of the holes, and then they have these little leaders that'll wrap around the wires, and it's worked really, really well. I think some benefits that we might not think about traditionally, maybe I've grown cucumbers like these on plastic mulch. I've grown them on bare soil. And in Oklahoma, the wind blows. And a lot of times they'll begin to vine. They'll maybe even have flowers set, but not fruit set yet. And you get a wind, and if it's just right, it'll just twist them round and round and round and really, really damage the vines. But these trellises, they prevent that. And so that's something that has been a great help. Also, when they grow along the ground, it gives insects a good place to get under and to hide and to find. And it seems like growing them up on this trellis, we've had very little traditional insect problems, squash bugs and things like that. So, but really, you know, the harvesting is the thing that makes it easier, because when they're on the ground, and if you miss a cucumber a time or two, by the time you find it in all that massive vines and leaves, it'll be big and past being, you know, what you would like to see in a cucumber. And so it's really, I think, a good viable option. And also, if you're doing it in a home garden or even in a truck patch, it can serve space. Instead of needing 10 feet or 12 feet for them to vine out, you can do it in a space 3 feet wide, and they grow straight up. And if you plant in the same place from one year to the next, you know, you might be able to not even have to take your trellis down if it's a permanent type structure like this. But we have right up here, we have one that's not on a trellis, that's traditional, it's just growing along the ground. And as you can see, when you look at it, you might see a cucumber, but you really got to get down in these vines and dig around to find them, whereas these ones on the trellis, but just when you walk up, you see them, and it's just, I think it's even faster. I'm the one that harvests these a couple times a week, and it makes it faster, it makes it easier, it's less labor intensive, and so I find that it's really a worthwhile, beneficial thing to do if you have the materials or you want to purchase them. Either way. And some of these panels are old cattle panels. You can tell that they've been bent up a little bit. They don't have to be perfectly straight. These T-posts are all old T-posts that were taken out of old fence rows. So, you know, if you're resourceful, it really doesn't have to cost you a lot of money to do it either. So I think those are some of the biggest benefits I've seen. As far as any other benefits to do with it, I think those are the greatest ones. I think there are more that would show the longer you've done it. But this year, this is really the first time we've done it on these panels, and it's worked really well. And I've been very happy with what we've seen.
Today we're doing something really simple. It's sauteed summer squash in garlic butter, and you can use any kind of summer squash that you've got going. Just going to cut it up so that it's all in similar size, bite-sized pieces. So I've got a tablespoon of butter. Now you could use an oil here, but I'm really going for the flavor of butter. I really like it. So we've melted a tablespoon of butter, unsalted if you have it, but salted will work. Then I've cut the summer squash. I've got two varieties here. And we're going to put this in here and let it start to cook down. Now I left my pieces a little bit bigger because my experience is if I'm going to cook something like summer squash and leave it for any time at all, if it's in tiny pieces, it tends to get overcooked fairly quickly. So I left it in fairly large pieces. But I want it to brown on the outside somewhat, so we're going to stir it every once in a while. Also, we want to stir it around a little bit so the garlic isn't on the heat quite as often or quite as long. But once you get it going and you get it coated on all sides, if you can, try and let it sit there because that's when the browning is going to take place. We're going to leave this for 3 to 5 minutes until you get it as brown as you want it to be and pretty much as cooked as you want it to be, because this is all the cooking it's going to get. So you can see we've got some browning, not as much as you may want to have on yours. You do develop some flavor with that. And also the appearance looks great, but you can see that we have gotten it to come to some degree of browning. I'm going to add about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm using a kosher salt, and again I'll probably go less because people can always add more, but you can't take it out. And about the same amount of black pepper to this. I'm going to take it off the heat, or at least turn the heat off. And then I've got a green onion that I've sliced up. And depending on which kind of squash you're using, that can really add a lot of color to this. If you're using patty pan, for instance, you may not get as much color coming out. That's partly why I mix the two different kinds of squash. This is going to go on a plate. This is basically ready to go on the dinner table. All right. On top of that, I'm going to sprinkle some Parmesan cheese. And you can do that the amount that you want. The recipe calls for about 1/4 of a cup. If you're going to add that much, you may want to stir it in a little bit before you take it off the burner. I find that it tends to melt too much and clump together a little too much when I do that, so I tend to sprinkle it on the top. And then we're just going to squirt it with a little bit of lemon juice to spark it up a little bit. And there you have it. Really easy. Took 5 minutes to cook. A little bit more time to chop it up, but zucchini and summer squash are a quick fix as far as cutting, so not a lot of other ingredients to prepare. I hope you'll try it. It's sautéed summer squash in garlic butter. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. Next week, Casey will be working on some fall chores. We'll visit an orchard with something for everyone. In the greenhouse, there will be meanness to the mealybugs. And in the herb garden, Barbara Brown will prolong the basil harvest. We wish you health and wellness, and we'll see you next week for more Oklahoma Gardening. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shop, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and the Tulsa Garden Club.